Story 1. The Whispering Pines. I've always been drawn to the woods, but I never expected to encounter what I did last summer. I had heard rumors about the Whispering Pines, a dense patch of forest at the edge of our town that locals avoided. They said the trees there were ancient, older than any other in the region, and that they whispered secrets in the wind. I thought it was all nonsense, of course, but curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I decided to venture into the Whispering Pines. The sun was setting as I entered, casting long shadows through the towering trees. The air felt heavier, the temperature dropping with every step I took. The usual forest sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling, were absent. There was just an eerie silence that hung like a thick fog. As I walked deeper into the woods, I began to hear it, a soft murmur, barely audible at first, but growing louder the farther I went. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably voices, countless of them, whispering in a strange, melodic rhythm. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The whispers grew more urgent, more insistent. It was as if they were calling to me, urging me to go deeper into the forest. And then, as if guided by an unseen force, I found myself standing in front of a massive, ancient pine tree. Its trunk was twisted and gnarled, its bark blackened as if it had been scorched by fire long ago. That's when I noticed something strange. There were symbols carved into the tree, old and worn, but still visible. They looked like nothing I had ever seen before, like some ancient language. The whispers became deafening, surrounding me, filling my mind with their maddening chorus. I reached out to touch the tree, and the moment my fingers brushed its bark, the world around me shifted. I was no longer in the forest, but in a dark, endless void. The whispers were gone, replaced by a single voice, deep and menacing. "You've been marked," it said. "You belong to the Whispering Pines now." Panic surged through me as I desperately tried to find a way back. But the void held me, cold and unyielding. The voice laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You'll never leave. You're one of us now." I don't know how long I was trapped there. Minutes, hours, days? But suddenly, I was back in the forest, lying on the ground in front of the ancient pine. The whispers were gone, and the forest was silent once more. I stumbled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I was out of the woods. But even now, as I write this, I can still hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable. They're with me always, a constant reminder of that night. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blows just right, I can feel the pull of the Whispering Pines, beckoning me to return. Story 2. The Watchers. I've always loved camping, especially deep in the woods where the stars shine brightest, and the only sounds are those of nature. But after what happened last fall, I'll never set foot in the forest again. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip, just me, my dog Max, and a couple of friends. We chose a remote spot in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by towering trees and thick underbrush. It was perfect, quiet, secluded, and far from civilization. The first night was uneventful, just the usual campfire stories and laughter. But the second night, things took a dark turn. We were sitting around the fire, roasting marshmallows, when Max suddenly started growling, his fur standing on end. He was staring into the darkness, his eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, trying to calm him down. But he wouldn't stop. His growl grew louder, more menacing. Then, out of nowhere, he bolted into the trees, disappearing into the blackness. I grabbed a flashlight and ran after him, calling his name. The others followed, their lights cutting through the darkness. But Max was nowhere to be found. We searched for hours, calling out, but the only response was the eerie silence of the forest. Then, we heard it, a rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the noise, and that's when I saw them. Eyes. dozens of them, glowing in the darkness, watching us from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to be any animal I knew of, and there were too many of them. "What the hell is that?" one of my friends whispered, his voice trembling. I had no answer. The eyes just stared at us, unblinking, unrelenting. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished, swallowed by the darkness. We stood there, frozen, too terrified to move. That's when we heard the voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, but unmistakable. "Leave," it said. "You're not welcome here." We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted back to the campsite, packed up our gear in record time, and left. As we drove away, I glanced back at the trees, half expecting to see those eyes watching us. But there was nothing, just the dark, impenetrable forest. We never found Max. We went back the next day to look for him, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. The forest was eerily silent, almost as if it was waiting. I haven't been back to the woods since. The thought of those eyes, those watching, unblinking eyes, haunts me to this day. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that voice, faint and distant, warning me to stay away. Story 3. The Lost Path. I've always been good with directions. So when I got lost in the woods last winter, I knew something was wrong. It was supposed to be a simple hike, nothing more. But the forest had other plans for me. It started innocently enough. I was exploring a new trail that I hadn't been on before, deep in the heart of the forest. The path was narrow and winding, but I had my map and GPS, so I wasn't worried. The air was crisp, the trees bare and skeletal, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. It was peaceful, almost serene. But then, the path started to change. It became narrower, more overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years. The trees closed in, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun, casting everything in a gloomy shadow. My GPS signal started to flicker, and then it was gone. I was on my own. I tried to retrace my steps, but the path behind me had changed as well. What had once been a clear trail was now a tangled mess of roots and brambles. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. I pressed on, hoping to find my way back, but the forest seemed to conspire against me. The trees all looked the same, and no matter which direction I went, the path always led me deeper into the woods. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig underfoot. Then, I came across something strange, a clearing in the middle of the forest with a small, decrepit cabin standing in the center. It looked ancient, the wood rotting, the windows cracked and dirty. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I was desperate for shelter, for some sense of direction. So I approached the cabin. The door creaked open with a sound that sent a shiver through me. The inside was dark, lit only by the faint light filtering through the dirty windows. The air was thick with dust and decay. But what struck me most was the feeling, the overwhelming sense that I was not alone. I heard a creak behind me, like the floorboards shifting under the weight of something heavy. I turned, but there was nothing there. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow, flitting just out of sight. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the cabin itself was holding me prisoner. Panic gripped me as I struggled with the door, but it was no use. The shadows in the room grew darker, more defined, taking on shapes that shouldn't have been possible. Then, I heard it, a voice, low and guttural, whispering in my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows closed in, surrounding me, suffocating me. I could feel them, cold and clammy, brushing against my skin, pulling me down into the darkness. I don't know how I got out of that cabin, but the next thing I remember is running, tearing through the underbrush, desperate to escape. The forest seemed to part before me, leading me out, back to the main trail. When I finally emerged, gasping for breath, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. I never found that cabin again, though I've searched for it many times. But the memory of that day haunts me. The forest isn't just a place. It's something more, something alive, with a mind of its own. And I'll never forget the words of that voice, echoing in my mind. You shouldn't have come here.